Thank you for purchasing a DF910 lap machine by Deltech Fitness. Your lap machine will be shipped in 2 boxes. In the first long box, you will have a C bottom frame, N rear cross member, F lat bar, D row bar, B front support, and A rear support. In the second smaller box, you will have P roller pads, instructions, wrenches and stickers, E cables, G upper pulley frame, S mushroom caps, K weight slide, J seat support, Olympic adapters, L hold down tube, M hold down support, C2 footrest, Olympic collars, I seat bracket, a hardware pack, U 4.5 inch pulleys and V 3.5 inch pulleys, H seat pad, C1 foot plate, A flanges, R bottom fully frame, and shoes. The first thing we're going to do is lay out the bottom frame. The bottom of the tube will have square holes and indents in it so the heads of the carriage bolts don't touch the floor. The top has round holes. The side with the angled flange will eventually become the back of the lap machine. Lay it on its side. We will lay out the machine from front to back, starting with the J seat support. The pulley flange faces toward the front of the bench, and it will line up with the 4th and 5th holes from the front. Next will be the M hold down support. Make sure to position the pull pin facing toward the back of the machine, and line it up with the next pair of holes. After that, grab the B front support. The front support has a tab near the bottom of the tube. Make sure that the tab faces the back of the machine. After that, we have the R bottom pulley frame. Line it up with the next pair of holes on the bottom frame. Finally, grab the A rear support. The rear support has a flange that pokes out one direction. This flange is pointed toward the back of the machine. Line up the farthest hole on the flange from the tube with the last hole on the bottom frame. To attach everything to the bottom frame, we're going to be using these M10 carriage bolts. The square boss under the head of the bolt locks into the square hole under the bottom of the frame to keep it from spinning while tightening. Grab all of the carriage bolts and 9 M10 nuts and washers. Push the carriage bolts through the bottom of the bottom frame, then through the flanges of the parts on top of it, then slip on a washer and a nut, and move on to the next one. Once you get to the last carriage bolt, make sure to bolt it through the back hole of the rear support. If you use the other hole, your lap machine will not assemble correctly. With all of the bolts in and nuts on, it's time to get everything snug. With one hand, push the carriage bolt into its square hole so it doesn't spin, and tighten down the nut with a 17mm wrench. We use lock nuts on all of our products, so the nut will feel tighter once you start to tighten into the nylon insert. This does not mean the nut is tight. Tighten all the way through the nylon insert until the nut doesn't spin anymore. Once you get to the last bolt on the rear support, snug it up, then rotate the tube into position. Then give it one more tighten to hold it into place. For the next step, we will be using the FF flathead screws. These screws require a large Phillips head screwdriver to tighten down. Just like the carriage bolts, they use an M10 nut and washer. Grab the 3 flathead screws, nuts and washers, and grab the C2 footrest and C1 foot plate. The foot plate has chamfered countersunk holes on the bottom. This is so when the bolts are tight, the head of the bolt sits flush with the plate. The plate can only go on one way. Make sure that the holes that are close together face toward the front, and thread a bolt through the bottom. Line up the foot plate with the bottom frame and thread the bolts through their corresponding holes. Finally, thread the flange of the footrest onto the bolts and top them off with washers and nuts. Once they're all in, snug them down with a screwdriver and wrench and stand up the whole assembly. Before we can install the rear crossmember, we must first slip on the rubber boots. The long side of the boot faces down toward the ground, and the holes face toward the side. If you've noticed in your bolt pack, we have 3 bolt sizes left that are very similar. For this next step, we will be using the thicker M12 bolts. There are 2 lengths of M12 bolts left. Compare the bolts to each other to figure out which ones are long and which ones are short. We will be using the longest M12 bolts now and the shorter ones later. Thread an M12 washer onto the long M12 bolt, then through the holes in the rear crossmember. Lift up the whole assembly and bolt the crossmember to the flange on the bottom frame. Slip on a washer and a nut. Once both bolts, washers, and nuts are on, tighten them down with some 19mm wrenches. Now it's time to grab the K weight slide and slip it over the rear support. There's a rubber bumper on the bottom of the weight slide. The bumper faces toward the back of the machine. With the weight slide on, grab the G upper pulley frame. To install, start by sliding one of the smaller tubes on the bottom of the frame into one of the supports. Then line up the other support and drop it into place. Once it's in place, bolt them together with the aforementioned shorter M12 bolts, washers, and nuts. This completes the frame assembly, so it's time to give all the nuts and bolts a final tightening down before moving on to the next step. For the next step, we will need the H seat pad, the I seat bracket, the EE small M10 bolts, and the II M10 washers. Lay the seat pad upside down and position the seat bracket on top of it. Line up the holes and get both bolts started into the nut certs on the pad. Once both bolts are started with washers, tighten them down with a wrench. Slide the seat bracket into the seat support and pull the pull pin. If the seat bracket does not fall into place, you will have to untighten the tighten down knob until it can move freely. Once the tighten down knob is out of the way, pull the pull pin and set the seat at a comfortable height, then tighten down the knob to take out any wobble in the seat. Grab the L hold down tube and slide it into the hold down support with the holes facing the back of the machine. Again, you might have to get the tighten down knob out of the way to get it into position. Next, slide the P roller pads onto the hold down tube. Then grab your mushroom caps. The best tool to install these mushroom caps is a dead blow hammer. Don't use a framing hammer on these caps because you can break them. Gently tap the cap into place until it bottoms out. If you don't have a dead blow hammer, a small dumbbell will also do the trick. Just make sure the head of whatever you're smacking it with is larger in diameter than about 1.5 inches or so. Now it's time to start installing pulleys. There are 2 different size pulleys. We're going to be using the bigger 4.5-inch pulley first on this bottom pulley frame. To attach the pulley to the frame, use the short DD M10 bolt, washer, and nut, and finish them off with some wrenches. Next, we're going to thread through the cables, starting with the upper cable. Thread the small eyelet end of the cable into the front slot of the upper pulley frame and out through the back slot. With the cable in place, we can install the pulleys. Grab the plastic bushings, long M10 bolts, washers, and nuts, and the smaller 3.5-inch pulley. Line up the cable with the pulley groove and push the pulley up into place with the cable on top of it. Press the plastic bushings into the holes on the upper pulley frame and thread the bolt through a washer, the bushing, the pulley, through the other bushing, and cap it off with a washer and nut. Repeat the same process for the first hole in the back of the upper pulley frame, and then move the cable back and forth to make sure it's on track and smooth. Next, it's time to assemble the double pulley brackets. Grab both flange A's, the 2 remaining large pulleys, the 2 remaining short M10 bolts, washers, and nuts, and sandwich the pulleys with the brackets and bolt them all together, using the single top hole and the farthest bottom hole. If your cable ends up too loose later, these holes can be adjusted to make it tighter. Now we're going to install the last pulley into the upper pulley frame. Thread the cable through the double pulley flange, then over the small pulley before pushing the pulley up into place. Using the same bushings and hardware, bolt the pulley into place same as before. The cable should exit toward the back of the machine. With the final pulley in place, take a snap hook and attach the upper cable to the tab on the weight carriage. Before we install the last pulley into the front pulley bracket, we need to thread through the lower cable. Thread the cable over the keeper bar in the flange, and then through the holes of the bottoms of the tubes. Work the cable under the big pulley, and then set it to the side. Line up the groove of the pulley with the cable and slide it into place. Bolt the pulley into place with the last M10 bolt, washers, and nut. If the cable comes off track before you bolt it down, you will have to redo the process. Once the pulley is in, thread the cable up over the bottom floating pulley and connect it to the tab on the front support with the snap hooks and a chain. Make sure to give it a pull to make sure everything is working correctly. If you find that the bumper on the bottom of your weight slide doesn't make contact with your bottom frame, try loading it down with some weight. Your cables will stretch when they are loaded down. If it still doesn't make contact, you can add another snap hook or unscrew the rubber bumper to make sure it rests on the tube. With everything in place and working correctly, it's time to tighten all of the pulley bolts. Make sure to not tighten the bolts too tight on the upper pulley frame because you can damage the plastic bushings. Finally, install your Deltech Fitness decal and model number sticker so if you ever need to order replacement parts in the future, you know what you have. Over time, you will wear out your cables and pulleys. We carry replacement pulleys and cables on our Deltech Fitness website. With the machine, we have provided a swiveling lap bar and row bar and Olympic adapter collars. If you choose to use the Olympic adapter collars, you can tighten them down with a small Allen wrench. Thank you for choosing Deltech Fitness.